Good evening to you and welcome. If you've just joined us, this is Africa News Network First Fast Live. My name is Cindy Mabi. And our top story this half hour, nothing has been heard from the National Prosecuting Authority today regarding the engagements with Mckinsey and Trillian. On Thursday, the NPA and Mckinsey's lawyers met to discuss an out-of-court settlement after being served with an order to freeze their assets. Mckinsey has already agreed to pay over 1 billion rand it charged in fees from Eskom as per a contract that is allegedly illegal. Trillian, which was expected to be part of the meeting, reportedly did not show up. The company still has 90 days to indicate whether they are defending the matter or not.
The preservation order basically says when you are served, you cannot dissipate those assets or deal with those assets in any other manner. They will be under the care of the curator, who will be looking after those assets in terms of ensuring that they remain under preservation. That is the essence of it. They have 90 days. If they enter an appearance to defend, they have 90 days within which they can indicate that we are defending. We will present to court evidence that shows that these contracts were lawful.
And while the crackdown on Mckinsey and Trillian has been welcomed, questions are being raised around who is next in line. And here are some striking similarities that make Treasury's integrated financial management system bungle a great starting point. Now, an internal Treasury audit showed how several companies such as KPMG, BITS, Apex, Accenture, Oracle paid millions irregularly, and Mckinsey and Trillian have received 1.6 billion rand in an alleged illegal contract. In the IFMS, payments were made without service-level agreements or timesheets for work done, and Trillian was paid without any contract with either Eskom or Mckinsey. And the IFMS fiasco saw payments being made despite no deliverables or quality assurances. Mckinsey and Trillian allegedly got paid on basis of fraudulent invoices with no services rendered. And one of the companies contracted in the IFMS, Accenture, was paid 4.1 million rand despite no budget allocation for the job that they were supposed to do. And the supply chain management rules were also allegedly flouted by Eskom in paying Trillian without having permission from Treasury for deviation. In June last year, ANN7 exposed the IFMS debacle, and several months later, all these firms escaped action despite several promises.
Ensure that as soon as possible we find a permanent person to head the IFMS project, and we will also ensure that as speedily as possible the forensic investigation is instituted so that we can get to the bottom of the matters before us arising from the report. It is my understanding that the Hawks have also communicated to the DG that they are investigating the aspects of this matter. And arising out of all of that, there will therefore be requisite action against anybody who may be found to have acted wrongfully.
Promote and enforce transparency. That's what we expect from National Treasury. Now, if National Treasury can't stand up to that, what is it that we are going to benefit? How can you ask other departments to be able to comply with the law when the main institution that is supposed to help us to get transparency has not been conducting itself like that?
And we're joined in studio by Dr. Charles Sinkala, international political expert and World Native Identity Foundation president. Good evening to you, Dr. Sinkala, and thanks so much for your time. And just what we've seen now with Mckinsey and Trillian, of course, almost atoning for their sins, if you will, saying that they have put aside, Mckinsey, they've put aside 1.6 billion rand that they're happy to pay back, regardless of what happens in the court process. What does this mean then for other transgressors, KPMG and others that have fallen from grace, in how the law is applied or even the investigation processes are applied?
Thank you very much, Cindy, for having me, and good evening to your viewers. You know, the laws are the same, you know, of the country, and they're governed by the Chapter 9 institutions, you know, and in the sense of them being applied to each and every multinational companies or any company which fell out of, falls out within the law boundaries. The targeting of Mckinsey and Trillian has been a separate incident. Because all these intelligence crimes, you know, they call them the soft crimes or the high criminal activities are handled by the Hawks. And if we talk about the Hawks themselves, the Hawks had a lot of problems within their management, where the head was suspended from 2001, I think 2011, for 6 years. Richard Munduli was just now relieved, and he was on the government payroll. I mean, I think they must have spent about over 8.3 million rand just to pay him for him staying away. And you know, when you have somebody in the acting position is a temporary position where you are looking for somebody permanent replacement for the office bearer. You know, the system gets compromised. And within the cases which you are doing, or even if somebody is in acting there, they do not perform to an extent to that they have to control all the things into a certain direction. You know, so the targeting of this company, where they have issued the court order to seize some of the assets for them to recover some money which was obtained in a fraudulent way, you know, it's just one of the cases which are pending, you know, for them to prosecute.
You talk about competence, or rather that systems and processes are weakened if there is no permanent leadership. But by the time it gets to law enforcement, the rot would have then started. The genesis thereof would have been within government institutions, and now we even know with the public sector in itself taking a big chunk of the blame for corruption in the country, is that these are individuals, and as you know, that corruption relations or corruptive relations start at that basis, at Director General and the business interest or influence from business. So how do you curb that if there is no oversight and we only hear about matters once they've blown into the public domain?
You see, this is a problem. It's unfortunate this has been happening in Africa, and not only South Africa, the rest of the African continents mostly, even in other parts of Europe and America. You can't fight darkness with darkness. That's unfortunate. You can't do that. You need to bring light to darkness for you to see and fight what is happening. So the integrity and the hygiene of these office bearers into these institutions has been compromised because they are part of the perpetrators of the system. So they use a selective justice, you know, so they can point up whatever company who is not complying with them, who they can pinpoint. And like we said, you investigated last year on other companies and entities where you haven't got the feedback. You know, there is a delay in the process, and in law, once a case has been reported, there's procedural systems which has to be taken into place, like investigations, you know, evidence, correction of the evidence, also the National Prosecuting Authority.
Yes, but we've seen, again, and I hate to break your word, in similar cases, as you were saying, that the integrated financial management system had to do with Treasury necessarily, not public enterprises like Eskom.
Yeah.
But there is haste in dealing with the mess or the rot at Eskom, more than what there is to clean up the mess in Treasury or other departments. Why do you think that there is this kind of inconsistency?
You know, the reason is the same thing about the corruption which has been looming, which is very difficult to curb at the moment, you know, into these public offices. And when you entrust people to be directors or in charge of these institutions, some of them, they're above the institutions. You know, you cannot be above the institution. You must play with the institution so that you work within the boundaries and the framework of the institution. If you talk about Eskom, there have been things which has been happening there, but there's no checks and balances, and to check from the Treasury the expenditure, how did they spend the 2 billion? And it's unfortunate that they're only discovering when things have gone to 2 billion or 4 million or 4 billion or whatever. There's no checks and balances of the Auditor General to execute or exercise their mandate to go to these entities, especially the parastatal companies, You know, it's not only happening to the public institutions, but also into the private sector. You know, but except there's a different term which they use in the private sector. They use it collusion or money laundering or whatever the germ, but it's all corruption. You know.
And the State of Capture report, of course, would have been that catalyst as well that would have put the focus so much more glaringly on Eskom and the business dealings there. But even in its truest form, the limitation that the mandate was essentially just to investigate, for example, President Jacob Zuma, the Gupta family and their associates. But we know that there are existing contracts, you know, evergreen contracts, and that there are companies who are essentially perpetuating corruption without being detected, or even if it is, it's not reported and nothing is done about it. Why do you think that there's that level of protection, if you will, for others?
Yeah, you know, the other area is when the ruling party gets involved and their own people, they are getting involved, it's difficult for them to flag them off that or whistleblowing because of that comradeship which they use into these private sectors. And it's very difficult for them to flag their own person, you know, so it's either they ignore it or they transfer that person. But again, this just goes to governance, you know. You need to have institutions to watch after other institutions so that you make sure that the mandate for these office bearers, it's also checked. You know, you cannot just have a director of the National Prosecuting Authority, you know, who is independent and does its own, because the National Prosecuting Authority director chooses what cases to prosecute. And the court won't receive a case without coming from the National Prosecuting Authority. You know, so these are some of the challenges which have been facing into the system. So the system of governance has been compromised in the sense that these people in the institutions, they cannot execute their mandate effectively because of the Rumian corruption, you know. And I think if the hygiene has been introduced into these offices where people are held accountable, and if we talk about also the media, if the media also reports something, the Public Protector Institution of Chapter 9 has to follow up that, you know, we had KPMG was flagged off. How far have you gone? Why the case hasn't gone to court? You know, the case always sits by the National Prosecuting Authority.
And maybe the active citizenry as well, you know, when we see with civil organizations holding government to account and raising certain issues that may have been either neglected or that have been put on the back burner. How much more if public office bearers are then, you know, either transferred or they find greener pastures in the corporate sector with all that institutional knowledge from government operations, and then in terms of procurement, you know, and how deals are struck, because we've seen that kind of migration. Is that also a loophole that could encourage corruption or perpetuate it?
Yes, you know, and if you talk about corruption, like what you have likely put it there, you know, transferring office bearers to another institution is another also delay on the cases of prosecution, you know, and you only transferring this person to the other side, and because of loyalty in government, it's a big problem. You know, and you only pray and hope that these institutions can work independently and reduce on the cabinet reshuffles of these public office bearers.
Dr. Sinkala, I was referring to when public office bearers are then in a lucrative position, if you like, in the public sector, and they have obviously that institutional knowledge of how government operations work and supply chain management, which opportunities are coming up, and they would probably be the preferred suppliers based on that information in terms of contracts. Is there, in your view, or is that a loophole that could encourage corruption?
Yes, you know, corruption is everywhere, you know, and it's very difficult to combat it. And in that way, you know, then they know the system, they know how it works, so they can mend or divert from the policies of the institutions, because they are fully aware of how it's happened. They can invite their own people, you know, for instance, they invite their own contractors whom they prefer. You know, so it's a bit complicated. As long as we do not have checks and balances of governance for people to watch the spend of the budgets, then it's going to be a big issue, you know. But
Yeah, but of course we want to make sure that things are not repeated, you know, that there is a learning and that systems are put in place. You know, you said the issue about oversight. We saw the parliamentary portfolio committees themselves shrugging. In fact, gasping with shock that they weren't aware of some of the things that are going on. Who's supposed then to be keeping watch over these kind of activities?
Yeah, those are the Chapter 9 institutions who are supposed to keep an eye on the governance, the Auditor General, the public protector, to make sure that, no, we heard this from the media, they pick it up, they run it to the government, can we have answers to this? So the situation of these public, Chapter 9 institutions have been less funded, you know. They do not have the capacity to follow up the cases, and mostly we hear the investigations are done by the media. Like Cat Branch, you know, like you like to say that you investigated another case last year, and there's no follow-ups, you know, and there's no public awareness that, you know, public can also report a case. And, you know, when the case is not reported, it cannot be prosecuted because no one knows about it. You know, so all these flaws, they happen in such a way, and to wait for somebody just to pinpoint and say, no, this is fraud, you know, or this is corruption, which has been happening to the institutions.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thanks indeed. Dr. Charles Sinkala, international political expert and World Native Identity Foundation president. Thanks indeed for your time.